Hannah was slowly walking down a busy street, but her mind was in a completely different place. She was going through a bunch of recipes in her head, trying to choose what to cook that night. She wanted to surprise her boyfriend with something special. During the 2 years of their relationship, it seemed that she had managed to cook all the dishes in the world. But that wasn't the only thing that was bothering the woman. She was getting increasingly worried over the fact that Manson seemed to be in no hurry to propose to her. And that was despite the fact that she was 3 months pregnant already. Sometimes she tried to justify her beloved, and other times she felt that he needed to be more decisive. Sometimes these thoughts even caused Hannah to start doubting if Manson even loved her at all. At times it seemed to her that he was the best man in the world, but sometimes she felt very cold and lonely next to her beloved. The woman wanted family comfort and warmth, and Manson seemed rather detached, absent both mentally and physically. Maybe that's just the way he is. No one is perfect. I'm certainly not, Hannah thought at first, but over time she began to lose her patience. The woman couldn't help but daydream about the way her wedding with Manson would look, imagining everything down to the smallest detail. Her dress, the decorations, the ceremony. She also dreamed of a honeymoon in some exotic place where they could relax and her new husband could open up to her from another side. Hannah often wished that she could have a heart-to-heart with someone with more extensive life experience to share her worries, but there was no one she could turn to. She didn't have any relatives who could help her see the situation from a different point of view. The woman was raised at the orphanage, which was hard for her, just like for all the other kids there. Nevertheless, Hannah tried not to despair and did her best to find joy in little things. Thankfully, the caregivers were very supportive. Having become an adult, the young woman got a job as a dishwasher in a cafe. Although it was far from the best job in the world, it did bring her a stable income. Moreover, Hannah didn't see a successful career as something that would make her happy. What she did want was to be a good mother, which she herself never had, and a loving wife who would greet her husband after work with delicious dinners. When she was at work, the woman felt she was completely disconnected from reality and only became herself again when the clock hands pointed to the end of her shift. So it was that day. The woman was immersed in her thoughts and didn't even notice how dark it was outside. Suddenly, some noise coming from the dark alley attracted her attention. Hannah looked closely and saw the silhouettes of 3 strangers. They were beating a man who was lying on the pavement, unsuccessfully trying to get up once in a while. Without thinking about the possible consequences, the woman rushed to help the unfortunate person. She started waving her purse, and in the next second she covered the man in the middle of the street with her body, screaming, "I'm calling the police!" The attackers were dumbfounded by the behavior of the pregnant woman, and so they slowly backed away, disappearing into the darkness. When Hannah looked at the young man's face, she was surprised to see no fear or sadness in his eyes. The stranger was all covered in bruises and abrasions, but nevertheless, he found the strength to smile at his savior. The woman noticed that the victim was dressed very poorly, like a homeless person, but there was no unpleasant smell coming from him, and even though his clothes were worn out, they were rather clean. The young people started talking. It turned out that Tom really was homeless. His story was so intricate and interesting that it couldn't leave anyone indifferent. The man said he didn't remember his past, but only the most recent events. Tom was found in a ditch with a broken head by some homeless people. He didn't have any money or documents on him. The homeless people nursed him back to health and even gave him a name, and he'd been living on the street ever since. Some privileged young men decided to beat him up. They couldn't get anything from the poor man, but they didn't like the way he looked at them, so they decided to get him for it. Hannah, I am very grateful for your help, although I am ashamed that I couldn't stand up for myself, Tom said kindly. There is nothing to be ashamed of. You became a victim of street hooligans. They are terrible people who don't know what kindness is. Come with me. I'll get you some food from the cafe, the woman replied in a kind voice. When each of them went about their business, Hannah couldn't shake off the impression the entire situation had on her. Meanwhile, the thoughts of what to make for dinner, her pregnancy, and the fact that Manson hadn't proposed yet all seemed to have vanished from the woman's head. Hannah kept thinking about Tom and how nice he was. She felt some kind of extraordinary human warmth emanating from him, which she felt missing in her life. Hannah couldn't help but smile at the thought of how brave she was that day. But she was also thinking if there was anything else she could do for her new friend. She simply couldn't comprehend how it was even possible for a young and intelligent person to end up on the street with no memory or a roof over his head. At some point, Hannah glanced at her watch and realized that she needed to pick up the pace if she wanted to get home in time to cook dinner for her boyfriend. When she looked at her windows and realized that the light wasn't on, she couldn't help but get anxious. There was a note on the kitchen table. "Hannah, I'm sorry to tell you this, but I've met someone. I've been in love with her for a long time. Please forgive me for everything." Even in her worst nightmares, the woman couldn't have imagined that Manson would ever betray her like that. Hannah immediately thought about her unborn baby, and a tear rolled down her cheek. The woman sank into a chair and glanced at the ultrasound picture on the fridge. She remembered the doctor telling her that she was having twins. Her mind went dizzy. She didn't have the slightest idea about how she was supposed to handle it all on her own. But that wasn't the end of her problems. Having learned that the dishwasher gave the leftover food to a homeless man, the management of the cafe threatened the woman with dismissal. The only reason she didn't get fired on the spot was because she was pregnant. A few months later, Hannah gave birth to 2 healthy babies. Time flew by quickly with all the diaper changes and midnight feedings. The kids took up all of Hannah's time and thoughts. The woman understood that she needed to earn a living, and when the kids started daycare, she went to the same cafe and got her job back. It seemed that everything in Hannah's life was finally working out. She'd settled into her routine, but the poor woman couldn't have imagined what plans fate had for her. Her little son was diagnosed with a heart condition. The doctors simply told the woman that the boy needed to undergo an expensive and complicated surgery. Hannah did everything humanly possible to get the money for the surgery. She even tried reaching out to the boy's father. Unfortunately, it turned out that Manson was in a car crash and was now disabled. He actually needed money almost as badly as Hannah did. Hannah turned to her colleagues at work, but no one really wanted to help her. She took extra shifts and tried to raise funds by working part-time as a cleaner in various office buildings. But the fundraising process was still painfully slow. Unskilled labor didn't pay all that well. Right about that time, the cafe where the woman worked was bought out by a new owner. Imagine Hannah's surprise when she recognized him as the homeless man Tom, whom she once helped. Only now he looked very different. The woman remembered how good she felt talking to him 5 years ago. As it turned out, Tom got his memory back and got back to his normal life. Now he bought the cafe and became both its manager and owner. When the man saw his savior, he immediately remembered everything. Meanwhile, Hannah seemed to have completely lost it and burst into tears right in front of him, explaining that her son needed expensive surgery. "It must have been God who sent you to me," Tom almost shouted with joy. During all those years, he couldn't stop thinking that he hadn't really thanked his brave savior. He couldn't do anything for Hannah back then, but he definitely couldn't have imagined how his life would change and that he would become a successful businessman. When the surgery was done, the doctors confirmed that Hannah's son was no longer in danger. Tom was very happy to have been able to pay back for the woman's kindness. The young people grew more attached to each other with each passing day and felt a strong mutual attraction. It seemed to both of them that they had known each other all their lives, and soon their relationship grew into something more serious. Having spent several years on the street, Tom wanted to live each day to the fullest, and thus just a few months later he proposed to Hannah.